So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are.
Absolutely. My name is Pablo Toledo, and I'm the Assessment Services Manager for Cambridge Assessment English in Southern Cone and Andes. And with me is my friend Alberto.
Yes, my name is Alberto. I'm from Brazil. I'm based in São Paulo, one of the biggest cities in the world. And I'm really happy to be here again talking to you about assessing writing online and also present with my colleague Pablo. This time we are going to talk about assessing writing online. And this is the agenda that we are going to cover in this webinar. We are going to start with a quick recap on assessing writing. Then we will talk about real-life writing and validity. We will also talk about different ways of assessing writing. And then developing and assessing writing with our learners. Next, we will talk about ways of giving feedback online. This is one of the key purposes for this webinar. And we will also talk about supporting every teacher and the resources available for this, right? So when we're talking about assessing writing online, we felt that first of all, we needed to do a quick recap on how to assess writing by all means. We feel that assessing writing online means that we have to know what exactly we want to assess in students' writing and how we can do it. So we're going to start with a quick question for you, just to invite you to share your thoughts here in the chat box, right? When we're talking about assessing writing, what are the challenges that we face when we do so? So here's a question for you, so you can start typing your ideas in the chat. What are some of the challenges teachers face when assessing their learners' writing? Well, I have one idea to start with. One of the things that teachers report is a challenge is knowing what to focus on, how to prioritize what to give feedback on. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the challenges that you have that you face? We would like to hear from you. I can see that you are already sending some comments here. For example, vocabulary. I can see also things related to grammar. Pablo, what else do you notice in the chat box that are
We
challenges?
have we have things like use of English, writing, things around topic. An interesting thing is the balance between context and substance, or content and the ideas. So how do you separate how something is written compared to what it is saying?
Mm-hmm.
Subjectivity is a very interesting one, and definitely something that we will be touching on. Structures, themes. Someone is mentioning assessment criteria, so this is something that we will most definitely be touching on. Handwriting, spelling, grammar, how to avoid biases. So more people concerned with issues of subjectivity.
Yes, I
Cons-
have seen also points such as credibility, fluency, cheating, and someone mentioned handwriting, which can be a challenge as well.
Most
We are
definitely.
going to we are going to talk about cheating and plagiarism as well in this process. Someone mentioned here style, so I can see that there are lots of ideas. And here, as I said, I gave you one initial idea to start with. When we are marking or assessing students' writing, we find it difficult to know what to concentrate on. So this is a challenge. We're going to be talking about this. But there are also some other challenges, for example, like giving meaningful and motivating feedback to the learner, and also knowing how much correction to give the learner. So if you notice that a learner is struggling in their writing skills, how much feedback can we give? Should we comment on everything all at once? Should we sort of stage the kind of feedback that we give and prioritize certain areas? The other challenge is how to encourage learners to peer or self-assess their writing. Nowadays, many of us are teaching remotely, and we also have a number of platforms and tools that can help us get students working together. this could be this is a challenge still, but we have more means to promote peer and self-assessment, and also using clear descriptors to assess writing. Many of us have heard in teachers' rooms that we teachers might have different opinions about the students' text. We might consider that the text was really good, and then our colleague might consider the text really weak. So using clear descriptors to assess writing is also a challenge. But there are also other challenges. Some of the challenges we can see here, they are related to when teachers are assessing their students' writing, right? But we also have other challenges from the perspective of the tasks that we set our learners. For example, are we measuring the skills that are relevant to real life language use? So my colleague Pablo will talk more about this.
Absolutely. And this is a very, very important question. And just to give you an example of things that can happen. Are we measuring skills that are relevant to real life language use is our question. Look at your screens and we are showing you something that is actually a speaking task. And in the speaking task, you have a text that you have to read out loud. Now, please type it in the chat box, just a yes or no. Do you think that this is a good task to assess someone speaking? So it is true that when we speak, we are just making sentences. But is it everything that we do, and is it the most important thing? So in terms of testing real life language skills, this would not be a very appropriate, or actually we're going to say this in a few minutes, a really valid task. This would not be a task to test what speaking is actually about. Now, let's look at this task now. I'm showing you a gap fill. You have a text and you have to fill in gaps. If we are testing writing, would this be a good exercise to actually test all the things that make writing good writing? It is true, you need grammar that can be understood. But is that everything there is? And while this would be a good task for something like use of English, this would definitely not be a task that would be looking at all of the things that we consider important in writing. So the challenge of assessing anything is, how do you make sure that you're assessing the things that you need to assess? And so in terms of going into the assessment of writing, our next question to you is going to be, what makes writing good? What are the things that we need to focus on when assessing writing? So we are going to give you a poll in a minute, and we are going to give you options. Is it good writing when the reader understands the message? What makes writing good? Is it good spelling, correct grammar, and clear punctuation? Is it a clear connection of ideas? Is it the register? If the text is formal, informal, as appropriate, and the tone of a language, is it the appropriacy? Or is it all of the above? On the right side of your screen, you're going to see a poll. So please, on the poll, click on the option that you feel is correct. Is it that the reader understands the message? Is it good spelling, correct grammar, and clear punctuation? Is it a clear connection of ideas? Is it the register, the appropriacy, the tone, or is it all of the above? So I see that we have a winner, and all of the above by a vast majority seems to be the winner. We have some fans of readers understanding the message, and some people are choosing a clear connection of ideas. Register has very, very bad take-up. No fans of Register today with us. But with 84% at this moment, all of the above seems to be winning. So Alberto, I think this sets the groundwork for you to talk about real life writing and validity right now.
Mhm. Absolutely, Pablo. So we did the poll because when we think about writing, there are some qualities to it, right? Now we're going to talk about writing in real life and validity. So when we are writing in real life, there are three main things that we need to bear in mind. And we need to know, first of all, what we are going to say. And this is true for all sorts of writing genres, be it a text message or a master's dissertation, for example. We need to consider how we are going to say it because each genre or writing type has some sort of protocol. So we say things in different ways and we need to set the tone right and also the effect our message will have on the reader. So we need to consider those three main points for writing in real life. Everything that we write, we have a target reader in mind, and we want the effect on the target reader to be purposeful and positive most of all. And then we go back to the question that Pablo discussed. When we set students tasks, are we measuring the skills that are relevant to real life language use? We are going to analyze now a writing task as a sample. And the first thing when we set writing tasks to our learners is to define what exactly we want to assess. So, how do we find out what we want to assess and what kind of reference can we have? Well, we are going to show you a sample task at level A2 in the CFR. And the CFR is a very good document, the Common European Framework of Reference, because it has descriptors for each of the skills. So we went to this written production scale from the Common European Framework of Reference, and we picked one of the descriptors for level A2 in writing. So the descriptor reads, at this level, learners can write very short, basic description of events, past activities, and personal experiences. So once we get this descriptor from the CFR, we need to make sure that we assess this competency in writing skills. So here is a task for you that we picked from Write and Improve, a Cambridge Assessment English platform that helps students to develop writing skills and assesses their writing electronically. So here is one of the tasks at beginner level, level A2. So the task reads, your friend Layla had a birthday party, etc. And then you are asked to write a note to Layla, and here are some points that you need to include in your note. And you also have a word count. So how valid is this task compared to the one that Pablo described earlier in terms of validity? So this task here has a context, which is very important that we give the students this context. It has a very clear target reader. In this case, it's Layla. So it also helps to make writing more related to real life language use. It has a topic. There is a context and there is a topic. You couldn't go to the party. It has a very clear text type. You have to write a note to Layla. And you also have the purpose. This is what you're going to include in your note. And you have a word count, which is related to the level of the task, right? So when we look at this task, we see that in many ways, this task is measuring skills that are relevant to real life language use. Every time we feel motivated to write something, it's because we have a clear purpose, we have a context, we are writing to a specific target reader, and sometimes the target reader can be varied. For example, when you write a story, you may not have in mind one specific target reader, but you have an audience as the target reader in mind. And then Pablo will go on. We talked about validity. Pablo will move on to talk about reliability.
Reliability is the second greatest pillar of anything that you assess. First, you have to make sure that you are testing the right things. But then there are two big questions that you need to be able to have a good answer for. Number one is, how can we make sure that we are measuring all writing by the same standard. So I, as a teacher, I have 20 students in my class, and I am looking at their writing. How can I make sure that I am being fair to everybody and that I am giving writing that is of the same quality, the same score, the same grade? How can I make sure that every text that I assess is assessed to the same standards and is to those standards applied in a consistent way? And the other big question is, how can we make sure that we are using the same standard as other teachers? If we are in a class, if we are in a school, pardon me, and in that school we have 3-5 teachers teaching the same level, how can we make sure that everybody teaching year 5 is assessing to the same standards? Or to be very, very big, in the case of Cambridge Assessment, we assess millions of learners each year. How can we make sure that we are applying the same standards in the same way? So issues of reliability. First is we need to define what we want to assess and what things we are going to focus on. We recommend, or one way to do it is, for example, to use CEFR descriptors like Alberto was showing you just now. They focus not only what you want to assess, but which standards you're going to use and how you are going to implement them. Then you need to select or design a task. So it can be, in the case of B1, for instance, talking about the Common European Framework, something like an email requesting information, because those are skills that, if you look at the descriptors or if you look at the description of what a B1 level does, is something that is very relevant and very valid to do. It can be an opinion article at B2 when things like argumentative begin to gain importance. It's an essay evaluating abstract ideas at the C1 level. And then we need to do a final check. We need to look at our task instructions, like Alberto was showing you right now. We need to look at the time available and the number of words. We need to look at the explicit assessment criteria. There were a lot of, in the chat box when we were asking you earlier what things to focus on, there were a number of references to the challenges of writing, and one of the things being the assessment criteria. And assessment criteria is absolutely crucial when it comes to reliability. If you have a good set of criteria and everybody understands that, it goes a long way towards being able to implement your assessment in a reliable way. Now, talking about the assessment writing criteria for Cambridge exams and the way that we do it, and a model that can help you, we look at 4 different criteria for assessment, for assessing writing. First is content, then communicative achievement, then organization, and then language. If you look at the handbooks for any of our exams, if you look at any of the places where we explain, or any of the webinars where we have talked about writing, we always go back to these 4 concepts. We are going to explain this at length, but basically each of these is framed in terms of a question, or is looking at one particular aspect of the writing. Content looks at how well a candidate has completed the task. So Alberto earlier was telling you about Leila and how she needed to write an email, a letter responding to an invitation. So has she actually responded to the invitation? Has she answered all of the things that she needed to answer? The second one is what we call communicative achievement. And it is how appropriate the writing is for the task. So this was an email to a friend. If your email to a friend looks like a really formal letter, something is not appropriate. Organization, how the candidate puts together the piece of writing is really important. Are the ideas well connected? Is the beginning actually clear, and does it introduce the ideas? Does one idea flow into the other? Is it clear to read? And then Yes, definitely the vocabulary, the grammar. If the grammar is not correct, if the vocabulary is not there, it's going to be really difficult to understand. Alberto is going to tell you a little bit more about the next step in our session.
Well, so far we have talked about challenges in assessing writing. Then we talked about validity, and then Pablo talked about reliability, right? But putting all those things together, there are different ways of assessing learners' writing, right, Pablo? Can you tell us more about this?
Absolutely, because basically, and now we would like you to share your thoughts on this next question, which is the big challenge. How do we assess and how do we provide feedback to our students on their writing that is both formative and informative? What we mean is formative in sense of something that helps develop their writing competence, and informative in terms of giving them information about what has worked well, what has not worked well. And while you are typing your answers, let's go back to some ideas about assessment, which are going to help us understand this formative, informative issue. There are different ways of assessing. And in this picture, we are looking at two very different instances of people assessing food. In the first picture, in the picture at the top, we see people eating or at a restaurant. Remember restaurants when they were still open and we were not in lockdown? We are looking at people at a restaurant who are tasting food. And at the bottom, we see two chefs, we see cooks that are cooking, and while they're cooking, they're trying the food that they cook. So think about that. Are they assessing the same things about the food? And are they assessing things in the same way? And what is relevant and what is not relevant for each of them? When you are trying food, when you're eating food and you're trying it, are you looking at the same things that a cook is looking at? Is it relevant to you? Are the same things relevant to you? And how do you decide? When you are trying things, when you're trying food, basically you're looking at things like, do I like it? Is it something that I like or not? Has it been brought to my table in a presentation that is nice? Is it filling? Do I feel okay after eating it, or do I feel like I need 5 more courses? Is it the same things that the cook is looking at, and how do they look at it? So the perspective of the cook, the perspective of the chefs, is similar to one of the two classic functions of assessment, which is formative. Formative assessment is the kind of assessment that we do in the process of learning, in the teaching learnings, as part of the teaching and learning cycle while we are learning. And it focuses on things which are different from the summative assessment. Summative assessment comes at the end of the process. So our chefs can be looking at, okay, this doesn't have enough salt. This is not salty enough. So I'm going to put some salt in, and I'm going to see if I can make it better. By the time the food has arrived at the table, it's not a matter of adding more salt or is it salty enough or not. It's a matter of, is this dish okay? No, it doesn't have enough salt. Okay, I don't care. I'm not going to put more salt now. I am not going to put it in the fire for another 5 minutes because it's not ready yet. It's by the time summative assessment comes at the end of a learning cycle, you just look at the product. You look at, is this okay or not? It's not about how can we make this piece of writing better. Sometimes you just need to see if the writing is good enough to meet a certain standard. And they are two different poles, two different ends of a spectrum. It's not a matter of this is here and this is there. It's a matter of how formative or summative do you want to be at some particular moment, and you can kind of move from one to the other. When and why we implement these different kinds of assessment is absolutely crucial. The cooks are thinking, let's cook better so that our eaters, our diners will like it. The people at the table, the summative assessment side, they are looking at, they're thinking, we like what they have cooked. They are two completely different questions. And in terms of going back to teaching now, when we are working with a formative perspective, the question is, let's look at what is going to make this learner learn better, or what is going to make this learner become a better writer. When we are looking at the summative, it's let's look at this piece of writing to see how good it is. It's two completely different orientations, because the formative side promotes an improvement of learning, and the summative perspective measures the learning that has already happened. But they definitely work together, and they are looking at each other. It is not two separate things. It is different stages of the cycle. So, coming back to the question that we asked you earlier, how do we provide writing feedback that is formative and informative? Alberto, what are some of the ideas that came up? Your sound is not on?
Yeah, it is on now. So we have lots of very interesting comments here, Pablo, but they are mostly related to the perfect analogy that you have made in relation to summative and formative assessment. We hear lots of comments here saying, I love the explanation, it's very clear, and they're all saying good things about the analogy.
Oh, great. So here where Alberto and I are right now, it's almost time for breakfast, so probably not a good time to think of lunch and dinner, but definitely we are moved. So, but we are glad that you think this analogy is useful. The main thing to remember is that this is a cycle, and it's not that formative assessment is good because it focuses on the process, and summative assessment is the bad cop because it looks at the product and it tells you good or bad. There is a time and a place for both, and there is definitely a function for each of these.
They're also commenting on things like clear rubric for assessment. They are talking about feedback that is both objective and subjective. So they are making lots of very interesting comments here, like sandwich feedback, good points, points to work on, good points again. Lots of very interesting comments.
Great. So please keep these ideas in mind as we focus, because so far we've been talking about issues which are relevant to assessment in general. In the next section, but when we're giving feedback, when we're giving formative feedback, there are three things that we want to focus on, and the sandwich is a really good thing to bear in mind here. What we provide writing feedback for, so basically every time we provide feedback, we need to remember that we do this for three different purposes. We want to achieve three different purposes. Number one is we want to make learners aware of their own strengths and weaknesses in relation to the standards required. So there is definitely something there where you need to know if you have reached the level that you're expected and to which degree you have done it. But then we want to inform the teacher and the learner of areas for development and or revision. This is the part where assessment is looking forward to, is looking at the future. So what are the things that we focus on? Assessment for learning. What are the things that you want to revise? What are the things that you need to know to move forward? And definitely, and one of the most important things of all that we must never forget, we want to encourage a critical self-awareness in the learners. Teaching is this fantastic thing where all teachers work to make ourselves irrelevant. We are teaching learners to become autonomous users of the language. So we are training learners to stop needing a teacher. So definitely critical self-awareness is crucial to achieve those ends. Alberto. Next, we're going to be talking about developing and assessing writing. So all about that. Over to you.
Yes, it's interesting to read questions such as how can we assess writing online, and how can we add an audio file to a Word document? And another question that came up here was, can we assess writing using a portfolio? We are going to talk about those things now. So here is a typical exam item to assess writing skills, right? This is why there is a tag here saying it is summative assessment. So the exam item is taken from one of our exams, Key for Schools, the new version of the exam, and it focuses on creative writing. Yeah, so as a summative task, we can see that the task aims to assess the following descriptor that we have seen before from the Common European Framework. At this level, learners should be able to write very short, basic description of events, past activities, and personal experiences. The first task we saw was a note to Leila, but now we're going to see a different way of assessing this descriptor with a different task, right? So the most important thing here is for your students to be ready to show that they are able to do this. There is a composite that is a set of competencies that they need to master in order to be able to show that they are ready to demonstrate this skill in a task or in an exam. So, for example, in order for them to be able to do this, they need knowledge of contextual vocabulary and how to spell the word. So someone asked here in the chat box, okay, where do we consider spelling, punctuation, etc.? So in order for them to be able to achieve this, it's very important that they look at that they develop knowledge of certain areas. One of them is vocabulary and spelling. They also need knowledge of adjectives, including possessive adjectives and their position in a sentence. They need knowledge of simple verbs, including verb to be and to have in the past tense. They need knowledge of how to sequence the events and link them with basic connectors like and, but, and because. Remember, we are talking about level A2. And they also need knowledge of basic text organization skills. For example, how to organize those ideas in a short paragraph. So, in order for them to be able to achieve this and to demonstrate that they are ready to write a very short basic description of events, etc., they need knowledge of those things, right? And then, when we look at the task for summative assessment in the classroom, remotely or face to face, we need to be able to help the students understand this knowledge and put this knowledge into practice when they are writing. So, this is the summative task. Now we're going to turn this into formative assessment, right? So, you want to help your students to write a good story, and you suggest the task below. This task can be found in course books, in the mock exams that we have available on our website. One of the approaches to help the students demonstrate that they have developed this is process writing. So process writing is an approach to teaching writing that allows the teacher and the students to go through the process of producing a text together. Here is a link to a blog post which gives you a brief description of process writing, and it's quite clear and well organized. So it's in process writing that we can consider things like developing critical awareness about cheating and how to avoid cheating, how to avoid plagiarism, and also helping the students to build this portfolio of drafts before they are able to submit the final draft. So, process writing has three phases, three bigger phases. It starts with pre-writing, where the teacher can do brainstorming of ideas. They can help the students to start planning for their writing, organizing their ideas, and selecting their ideas as well out of the brainstorming phase. And then we have the writing and revising phase where the teacher can get, where the learners can get feedback from the teacher. They can exchange drafts with peers. They can reorganize their ideas, and then they can edit and remove things and change things. They can also change words and expressions in this phase. And then we have the editing phase where learners can check punctuation and spelling as part of the process. Punctuation and spelling was mentioned here many, many times, where learners can also check grammatical inaccuracies with the feedback from the teachers or from the peers, and then they do the proofreading before they are ready to publish the final version. By publish here, we mean submitting it to the teacher, or maybe publishing it in some sort of platform like a blog or something that the teacher has organized for the students to submit their writing tasks, right? So when we look at the process writing phases, we see that it's in those two phases here, writing, revising, and editing, where formative assessment actually happens, where students are ready to are able to write a draft, get feedback, write collaboratively, get more feedback, and then they can do final checks, and then they publish the final version, right? So this, it's also in this phase where the teachers can work with learners to discuss things like avoiding cheating, also avoiding plagiarism, because students here should be doing their best to try different drafts and not only submit one draft of their writing task. And this, all of this can be done online nowadays as well. So let's look at this task again, and then we're going to look at this task from the perspective of helping the students to develop writing skills using process writing and its different phases. So as I said, you want to help your learners to write a story like this. What you can do is, in the pre-writing phase, you can do brainstorming of ideas. So we have here specific vocabulary for those images. We have ways of planning and organizing, like sequencing the events. Then they can select the ideas. Then they can, for example, write a first draft, and then they get feedback from the teacher on how the ideas are sequenced. Then they can do pair, group writing, and circle writing. We are going to go back to this point in a minute. And then they can reorganize their ideas by changing words and expressions. And then they come to a phase of editing where they can check punctuation and spelling in another draft, and then they can check grammatical inaccuracies, and then they can redraft the text either together with peers, or they can do it on their own, or maybe because we are teaching remotely, they can do this using platforms that allows for collaborative writing like Google Docs and many others, right? And then they publish the final version. I have this red arrow here in this area for pair, group work writing, or circle writing, because if we are teaching remotely, we may not be able to do the typical circle writing where learners are in circles writing the ideas together and pieces of paper keeps moving from one learner to the other. But we can do this using electronic platforms that we're going to talk about in a minute, and learners, with the support of the teacher, can get immediate feedback on this, and then keep improving and improving until they submit a final version of their draft, right? So process writing allows for us to go back to the criteria that Pablo mentioned, but what we do with the criteria in the process writing stages is, instead of looking at definition of those points, we turn the definitions for those points into questions, and we use this criteria throughout the process, the stages, right? So for example, content. Have they done what they were asked to do? So you can use this question to elicit thinking, critical thinking from the learners. Communicative achievement. Is this informal or formal, or is the register appropriate? Organization. Are the events in a logical order, or do you need to rearrange things? In terms of language, is there a range of structures and lexis, or the language is too repetitive with limited vocabulary, for example? is the language accurate? So you use the criteria, you turn the definition into questions to help the learners become more critical and aware of their weaknesses, right? And in order for you to also help the students, what you can do is you can turn the summative task into a formative assessment by adapting the tasks depending on the kinds of learners and specific needs that they have. So you can, for example, adapt this task like this. Before you ask the students to write, give them the opportunity to list ideas or language that they can see in the pictures, especially that in the context where we are teaching remotely, we can provide the students with a small table like this, and then the students will be, first of all, generating ideas, thinking of the images, listing verbs or things they can see in each of the images. You can, for example, give the students a model, and then you allow the students to personalize that model by adding information of their own, but at least they have some sort of frame in which to include points, and then gradually develop writing skills and making sense of the sequence of events and the kind of language they should be using. For example, first, comma, we, blah, blah, blah. Or you can, for example, give them a model and allow them to write their own version of the story, or personalize this version, but without so much support like we have seen in the image before. Or you can just use it as it was in the exam. You give them the task and they have to write the short story. But there are different stages that you can do by adapting the task to support learners, and that would depend on their specific needs, right? Now we're going to talk about giving feedback online, and Pablo will start with some ideas. As I said at the beginning, first we needed to consider what and how to assess, and then how can we do it online.
And thank you, Alberto. And one thing that speaking to teachers and friends is that actually some of the things that we do online for writing are perhaps not that different from the way we would do it in a live classroom, because normally many of the ways in which we assess writing are things that we just take pieces of writing home, we do something with them, and we bring them back to the class. Of course, some of the things that Alberto was talking about and focusing on the whole process of writing brings us more into class work and collaborative work. But what do we do? Or what are some ways in which we can save time and do things better and more efficiently and give our students richer feedback on screen when we are just looking at their writing outside of the classroom? And a very useful and effective way is knowing how to do proofing of electronic documents, of electronic texts. We are going to look at Word because it's a very popular piece of software, but this applies to other ways of doing this. You can do it on PDF, you can do it on other writing programs like Google Docs has a very similar function, or OpenOffice. And we're going to look at how to use the track changes. We are looking at an extremely simple text. Hello, would you like to come home for dinner tomorrow? I will prepare your favorite food. Love, Pablo. So, very simple message to Joe. The first thing we're going to look at is we're going to go to a ribbon, and we're going to go to the Review tab. In that Review tab, we are going to make sure that we enable the track changes function. And this is going to save us a lot of time, and it's going to make our job a lot easier. And training our students to do that is going to be very efficient. Why? Because then we can simply write our feedback on the text, and the feedback is going to show in different ways. If you look at the screen here, look at the things that I've done and some useful things around it. Number one, first and foremost, is if you look at the bottom, you will see that I have just pasted a table with the 4 assessment criteria. content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. I have given my student a grade from 1 to 5, as they would in a regular Cambridge exam, and a small comment on how they have done for each of those assessment criteria. This is a good way to make sure that I am valid in my assessment, that I'm covering all the things that I want to do, and that I'm being reliable because I am actually applying one standard. But then if you look at the text itself, if you see here in yellow, I have highlighted places where I have simply typed and added text there because there were missing words. My student wrote, "Would you like come home?" And I added the word "to," which was missing. And the same thing for something that was missing from the task, which is I needed to make a suggestion about the time that the student was supposed to arrive. And I just added, "How about 7 p.m.?" I also corrected things. I deleted the "to" in "I will" to prepare, and I corrected the spelling in "favorite." And in the track changes, you can see this in a different color that makes it very simple to see. And I have done more, which is I have added comments. And in my comments, in "I will" to prepare, I said, be careful with your tenses, please review the exercise in Unit 3. And also, at the end, I made a comment about the closing, and I added a link to an online lesson or to an online activity in the Cambridge Assessment website that will be useful. Look at how rich this feedback is. I am giving formative suggestions. I am referring to things that we have done in the past. I am using a clear assessment grade, and it is very simple to do because you don't need to worry about highlighting in different colors and typing loads of things in the end. You can just save time, but it can get better and it can get richer because you can use more than words. You can speak your feedback. You can just, if your student has sent you an electronic text, you can look at that text, and instead of typing all of these things, you can say all of these things. You can record your oral feedback and send it to your students. You can do it via a WhatsApp message. You can record your audio and just send it to them on an email. Or you can use a website such as VoiceSpice and just record something online and then send it to your students so that they can view it. This means that you can look at it and speak for a minute. 1 minute is less time than you would spend typing it, but because you're speaking, you will be able to give your students a lot more feedback, a lot more information. But it can get better. You can record your own video feedback. What if they could see you? What if they could see their screens? You can see our colleague Laura on here on the screen, because this is actually an idea that she mentioned in a brilliant webinar that you can check out in our YouTube channel with Loom. And Loom.com is a great screen recording tool. So Loom is going to, you go to the website and you just click a button and it's going to record your screen. So if you are looking at the text that your student wrote up on the screen, you just put it up there, you click record, and it is going to show your face that you can see at the bottom. You record your screen and your camera. Then you just show your students the text that they wrote, and you talk for a minute or as long as you like about, you give them all the feedback, and they're going to be looking at, they will receive a link, they will click on that link, and they will see a video of their text and your face going over all of the things that they did. You can highlight things as you go. They can play it faster or more slowly. So this is actually also a good listening activity. And it's going to be absolutely brilliant. It is not going to take a lot of time from your side. It's probably going to take less time than it would to write a long comment at the end. TechSmith or Jing is another way to do this. If you are shy about showing your face, Jing is not going to show your face as you do it. But what if you could save even more time and actually not do the correction at all? What if we can do it for you? Alberto, is that even possible?
Yes, it is possible, and we also have other tools. For example, Write and Improve. Write and Improve is a free platform for learners, which help learners to practice writing and develop their skills with immediate feedback, and that can be also helped by the teacher. So by using Write and Improve, learners can practice writing English, then they get a grade in seconds, and then they look at the feedback and they make changes and they keep improving, right? So on the handout, you will be getting a link to this tutorial on how to get started with Write and Improve. And basically, you have over 200 free tasks for learners at different levels. So learners can choose one task, and then they can submit their answers to their task. And then the platform on the right here will correct their text immediately with highlighted parts of the text or some boxes commenting on their writing. And then on the left, learners can edit by looking at the feedback and submit their text again to get more feedback from the platform, and so on and so forth. Teachers can also create groups into Write and Improve. This is an area of the platform called Plus ClassView. And ClassView is not a free area, but at the moment it's free for 2 months. So teachers can set writing tasks for learners, receive their work already marked. Teachers can add to the feedback from the platform, and also teachers can get the task, get learners and class reports, and then it helps the teacher to save time and watch the learners as they are improving their writing skills. You will also find the link to this tour of ClassView on the handout for you to find out more about this platform and the ClassView feature for teachers, right? Well, we are nearing the end of our webinar. So there are two things I'd like you to do. One of the things is give us feedback on the webinar, so you can take part in this survey here. So you click there, and you will be able to give us some feedback and give Cambridge feedback as well on what you thought about the webinar. And you can also participate in this research by signing up for user testing and research with Cambridge English. So it's something you can find out more about. And I think Pablo will also have something to help you. But before that, this is a time for you to ask us some questions. I know you have asked many questions during the webinar. We could pick some of the questions because there were many coming up, but we are ready to answer a few more questions before we finish.
And one thing that came up in the chat box is that there were a number of questions about how to assess writing and how to do it with very large groups. There are teachers, and I think, Alberto, that the tool that you should just shared with us, which, remember, everything is going to be in the handout, is going to help teachers that have really large classes, right?
Yeah, I can see lots of comments here. For example, one of the participants asked, can we use Loom with Google Classroom? Absolutely, because Loom generates a video file that you can afterwards send to the learner, or you can upload it to the platform.
Exactly. It generates a link, and you just share the link with the learners. You can send it on an individual email so that not the whole class has access to the feedback from one particular learner, or you can use it for a common errors session, and you can record things from different learners, show them up on the screen, and share that video with the whole class. It integrates very easily. And the same applies to any of the other tools that we have done. Actually, sharing it with your sharing common errors or feedback with the whole class without using so much class time and giving learners time to just go over that feedback is one of the great advantages of assessing writing online compared to doing it in class.
Yeah. Well, I have another question here, Pablo, about some of the issues we discussed during the webinar. Which tool can we use to check whether the students write their own essay or simply copied it from the internet? Well, cheating and plagiarism is an issue when we are talking about writing skills, but remember, it's not only because we use online tools nowadays. A student could have done that at a time before the internet. What's most important in this discussion here is when we use process writing, we can help the students to avoid this first by making them aware that this is not right. Second, because they will be drafting and redrafting and possibly with a peer, that's an option that you have, you will get the students, you help the students move away from copying things from the internet because you want to see the development, not only the final version, right?
Yes, absolutely. And leading us into the next section is someone asked, are there any modules or materials available in the web that we can use for teaching? And boy, do we have resources for you. So for the end of today's session, we would like to share with you some resources which are going to help you teach and, well, we've been talking about ways, resources for assessing writing. Let's talk about some things that can help you develop that or teach writing skills. First and foremost, what are you doing tomorrow? Because we have some webinars coming up in our calendar, and some of them have to do with writing. Tomorrow, there will be a webinar on reading and use of English at C1 and C2 levels. And the day after tomorrow, on the 5th, so Friday, we're going to have a webinar about writing at C1 and C2 levels. And then next week, we're going to have a similar webinar to today's, but about reading and listening. And there are definitely more coming up. So here is the link, which is going to be in the handout, to our global webinars page, and this will show you our whole calendar. There were questions earlier about what is the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. And in the handout, you're going to see the links to the whole document of the Common European Framework, the companion volume, which adds new descriptors, which came out in 2018, and then a video from one of our previous webinars on how to apply the Common European Framework to your curriculum. So not the document, but what this actually means for you. And then there was a question about resources. Supporting Every Teacher is the Cambridge English website, is a page on the Cambridge English website where you can look at all of the resources that we are producing and making available in the current scenario. There are things there about teaching online. There are things there about exam preparation, of course. There are loads of material. There are links to all of the materials that Cambridge is putting together. And included there is our free interactive support pack for teachers, Inspire, which brings together tons of useful links and information about all of our exam range, all of our preparation resources, and all of the ways in which you can find our content online.
Pablo, can I just add something?
Absolutely, please.
There were questions here about track changes. On the handout, you will find a link to a tutorial on how to use track changes. So explore the handout. There's loads of information and links there for you to find out more about the tools, right?
Yes, in the handout, you will find video tutorials and links to all of the tools that we have mentioned, as well as a number of resources. So this is going to keep you busy after the session and for the next few weeks. So Alberto, I think our time is up. So we are very, very grateful to each and every single one of you that joined us today in the morning, afternoon, evening. And we hope that you have found this session useful and that this is going to help you in your teaching and assessment, online and both online and offline.
Yes, I would also like to apologize because there are so many questions and we don't always have time to answer all those questions. But please keep participating and keep the conversation going because we might be addressing the questions in the upcoming webinars as well, where many of our speakers in Cambridge Assessment English will be discussing similar issues. So keep on participating and commenting in the chat box and asking us questions, right? Thank you very much.
There is also a link in your webinars to a survey. If you, on the survey, you have the opportunity to also suggest subjects and topics for our upcoming webinars and to let us know what things you liked and what things we can improve about the websites that we are doing. So please take a couple of minutes to fill in the survey.
Thank you very much once again.
Have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you, Pablo.
Goodbye, Alberto. Have a great day.